Hi, welcome. Chapter 4: What Books and Burials Tell Us. Have you ever heard about Vedas? Vedas are collections of spiritual literature of the ancient Indian culture. They are collections of poems or hymns composed in Sanskrit thousands of years ago. Veda means knowledge. These are believed to be composed by Indo-European speaking people who lived in northwest of India. There are four of them: the Rigveda, the Samaveda, the Atharvaveda, and Yajurveda. The oldest Veda is the Rigveda. It was composed about 3,500 years ago. The Rigveda includes more than 1,000 hymns. These hymns are called sukta. Sukta means well said. What is a hymn? Hymn is a poem of praise to God. These hymns in Rigveda are in praise of various gods and goddesses. Three gods are especially important: Agni, Indra, and Soma. Agni is the god of fire, Indra is a warrior god, and Soma is a plant from which a special drink was prepared. These hymns were composed by sages or rishis. Priests taught students to recite and memorize each syllable, word, and sentence bit by bit with great care. Note that most of the hymns were composed, taught, and learnt by men. A few were composed by women too. The Rigveda is composed in Old Sanskrit or Vedic Sanskrit. Vedic Sanskrit is different from the Sanskrit people learn and use these days. See, the books we use today are written and printed, but in olden times the Rigveda was recited and heard rather than read. It was written down several centuries after it was first composed and printed only less than 200 years ago. See, here is a manuscript of Rigveda. This manuscript of the Rigveda was found in Kashmir. It was written on the bark of birch tree. About 150 years ago, it was used to prepare one of the earliest printed texts of the Rigveda as well as an English translation. It is now preserved in a library in Pune, Maharashtra. How historians study the Rigveda. Historians, like archaeologists, find out about the past, but in addition to material remains, they examine written sources as well. Let us see how they study the Rigveda. Some of the hymns in the Rigveda are in the form of dialogue. Let's read through a part of one such hymn, a dialogue between a sage named Vishvamitra and two rivers, Bias and Satluj, that were worshipped as goddesses. You can find the rivers on this map. We know Satluj and Bias are tributary of Indus River. Here Bias originates from Himalaya and flows through the Himachal Pradesh. It meets Satluj in Punjab. Finally, Satluj drains into the Indus River. Just keep in mind the places these rivers flow through. Vishwamitra and the rivers. Vishwamitra. O rivers, come down from the mountains like two swift horses, like two shining cows that lick their calves. You move like chariots to the sea through the power of Indra. You are full of water and wish to unite with one another. The rivers. We who are full of water move along the path the gods have made for us. Once we start flowing, we cannot be stopped. Why do you pray to us, O sage? Vishwamitra. O sisters, please listen to me, the singer who has come from a distance with his chariots and carts. Let your waters not rise above our axles, our shoulders, so that we can cross safely. The rivers. We will listen to your prayers so that you can cross safely. Historians point out that this hymn was composed in the area where these rivers flow. They also suggest that the sages lived in a society where horses and cows were valued animals. That is why the rivers are compared to horses and cows. The modes of transport mentioned here are chariots and carts. Other rivers, especially the Indus and its other tributaries and the river Saraswati, are also named in the hymns. The Ganga and Yamuna are named only once. Cattle, horses and chariots. There are many prayers in the Rigveda for cattle, children, especially sons, and horses. Horses were yoked to chariots that were used in battles. These battles were fought to capture cattle. Battles were also fought for land. Land was important for pasture and for growing hardy crops like barley. Some battles were fought for water and to capture people. Some of the wealth that was obtained was kept by the leaders. Some wealth was given to the priest and the rest was distributed among the people. Some wealth was used for the performance of yajnas or sacrifices in which offerings were made into the fire. These were meant for gods and goddesses. Offerings could include ghee, grain, and in some cases animals too. Most men took part in these wars. There was no regular army, but there were assemblies where people met and discussed matters of war and peace. They also chose leaders who were often brave and skillful warriors. Words to describe people. In Rigveda, people are described in several ways in terms of the work they do, the language they speak, the place they belong to, their family, their community, and cultural practices. Let us see some of the words used to describe people found in the Rigveda. There are two groups who are described in terms of their work. One is the priests. They were sometimes called Brahmins. They performed various rituals. The other group is the Rajas. These Rajas were not like the ones you will be learning about later. These Rajas in Rigveda did not have capital cities, palaces or armies, and they did not collect taxes. Generally, sons did not automatically succeed fathers as Rajas. Two words are used to describe the people or the community as a whole. One was the word Jana, which we still use in Hindi and other languages. The other was Vish. The word Vaishya comes from Vish. Several Vish or Jana are mentioned by name. So we find reference to the Purujana or Vish, the Bharata Jana or Vish, the Yadujana or Vish, and so on. Sometimes the people who composed the hymns in Rigveda described themselves as Aryas and called their opponents as Dasas or Dasyus. Dasas were people who did not perform sacrifices. They probably spoke different languages. Later, the term Dasa and the feminine term Dasi came to mean slave. Slaves were women and men who were often captured in war. They were treated as the property of their owners who could make them do whatever work they wanted. Sanskrit and other languages. We said in the beginning that the Rigveda was written in Vedic Sanskrit. Sanskrit is part of a family of languages known as Indo-European. Some Indian languages such as Assamese, Gujarati, Hindi, Kashmiri and Sindhi, Asian languages such as Persian, and many European languages such as English, French, German, Greek, Italian and Spanish belong to this family. They are called a family because they originally have words in common. For example, take the words Matra in Sanskrit, Ma in Hindi and Mother in English. See, three different languages have almost similar words with same meaning, so they are called belonging to same family of languages. Other languages used in the subcontinent belong to different families. For instance, those used in the northeast belong to the Tibeto-Burman family. Tamil, Telugu, Kannada and Malayalam belong to the Dravidian family. And the languages spoken in Jharkhand and parts of central India belong to the Austro-Asiatic family. See, While the Rigveda was being composed in the northwest of the subcontinent, there were other developments elsewhere. Let us look at some of these. Silent Sentinels, the story of the Megaliths. Look at this illustration. These stone boulders are known as megaliths. Megaliths literally means big stones. These were carefully arranged by people and were used to mark burial sites. The practice of erecting megaliths began about 3000 years ago and was prevalent throughout the Deccan, South India, in the northeast and Kashmir. See, this type of megaliths are known as cyst. Some cysts, like this one, have portholes. You can see here the porthole. Portholes were used as an entrance. This is one of the megaliths found in Krishnagiri, Tamil Nadu. You can also note the porthole here. Now look at this map. You can note some important megalithic sites on this map, especially in South India. Here, Brahmabiri in Karnataka and Adichanallur in Tamil Nadu. These two sites are very important megalithic sites in South India. While some megaliths can be seen on the surface, other megalithic burials are often underground. Sometimes archaeologists find a circle of stone boulders like this one in this image, or a single large stone standing on the ground. These are the only indication that there are burials beneath. These are images of megaliths found in Marayur in Idukki district, Kerala. How did they make these megaliths? There were several things that people did to make megaliths. They had to break big boulders or big rocks. Then they would find suitable stones and shape them. They had to transport the stone to the burial place. They would dig pits and place the stones in place. Finally, they would bury the dead. Please note, you may find variations in this order in constructing the megaliths. All these burials have some common features. Generally, the dead were buried with distinctive pots which are called black and red ware. You can see the black and red ware in this image. Tools and weapons of iron and sometimes skeletons of horses, horse equipments, ornaments of stone and gold are also found. Here you can see horse equipment, axes and a dagger that were found from the megaliths. Finding out about social differences. We know archaeologists and historians study about the early years using the remains of buildings and dead people. Archaeologists think that objects found with a skeleton probably belong to the dead person. Sometimes more objects are found in one grave than in another. It is a megalithic site in Brahmagiri, Karnataka. Here, one skeleton was buried with 33 gold beads, 2 stone beads, 4 copper bangles, and 1 conch shell. Other skeletons found here have only a few pots. See, these finds suggest that there was some difference in status among the people who were buried. Some were rich, others poor. Some chiefs, others followers. Were some burial spots meant for certain families? Sometimes megaliths contain more than one skeleton. These indicate that people, perhaps belonging to the same family, were buried in the same place, though not at the same time. The bodies of those who died later were brought into the grave through the portholes. In this image you can see the porthole here. Stone circles or boulders placed on the surface probably served as signposts to find the burial site so that people could return to the same place whenever they wanted to. A special burial at Inamgaon, Maharashtra. Inamgaon in Maharashtra is a site on the river God, a tributary of the river Bhima. It was occupied between 3600 and 2700 years ago. Here, adults were generally buried in the ground, laid out straight with the head towards the north. Sometimes burials were within the houses. Vessels that probably contained food and water were placed with the dead. One man was found buried in a large four-legged clay jar in the courtyard of a five-roomed house. This was one of the largest houses in the site, in the center of the settlement. This house also had a granary. The body was placed in a cross-legged position. This is a four-legged clay jar which was used for burial. What skeletal studies tell us? It is easy to make out the skeleton of a child from its small size. However, there are no major differences in the bones of a girl and a boy. Can we make out whether a skeleton was that of a man or a woman? Sometimes people decide that on the basis of what is found with the skeleton. For instance, if a skeleton is found with jewelry, it is sometimes thought to be that of a woman. However, there are problems with this. See, in those days, often men also wore ornaments. So, a better way of figuring out the sex of a skeleton is to look at the bone structure. The hip of the pelvic area of women is generally larger to enable childbearing. See, these distinctions are based on modern skeletal studies. About 2000 years ago, there was a famous physician named Charaka who wrote a book on medicine known as the Charaka Samhita. There he states that the human body has 360 bones. This is a much larger number than the 200 bones that are recognized in modern anatomy. Probably Charaka arrived at this figure by counting the teeth, joints, and cartilages. Occupations at Inamgaon. Archaeologists have found seeds of wheat, barley, rice, pulses, millets, peas, and sesame. Bones of a number of animals were also found. Many of such bones had cut marks that show they may have been used as food. These include cattle, buffalo, goat, sheep, dog, horse, ass, pig, sambar, spotted deer, blackbuck, antelope, hare, and mongoose. Even birds, crocodile, turtle, crab, and fish were also found. There is evidence that fruits such as ber, amla, jamun, dates, and a variety of berries were collected by people in Inamgaon. Looking at a different part of the world, China, let's try to understand a different way of people's lives. Around 3500 years ago, we find some of the first evidence of writing in China. These writings were on animal bones. These are called oracle bones because they were used to predict the future. Kings got scribes to write questions on the bones. Would they win battles? Would the harvest be good? Would they have sons? The bones were then put into the fire, and they cracked because of the heat. Then fortune tellers studied these cracks and tried to predict the future. Obviously, they sometimes made mistakes. These kings lived in palaces in cities. They collected vast quantities of wealth, including large, elaborately decorated bronze vessels. However, they did not know the use of iron. Do you find any difference between the Raja of the Rigveda and these kings? In this chapter, we were trying to analyze the people in two different parts of the subcontinent at the time of the oldest Veda, Rigveda, was composed. Around 3500 years ago, we find society was grouped into various social groups. Even the burials show differences in social status. Today, thousands of years later, our society is still trapped in the Varna system and differences in social status. Thanks for watching and learning. Thank you.